Hello and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. I am Taylor Rockwell. Daryl Grove is not with me. When the going gets cold, as it has here in Virginia, Daryl goes to Florida, apparently. He is down in Florida for the week. I am alone in studio, but not alone in terms of people I'm talking to, because I called up Paul Tenorio of The Athletic. Paul was with the U.S. national team in their January camp. He'll be going back to cover their upcoming friendlies. So we got a great look at what the team is doing, what Gregg Berhalter is doing, who's responding very well to that training, and a little hint as to who maybe is not. We also look to the MLS offseason, what happened with the draft and what might happen with the draft going forward, and then some teams that are doing well this season, some teams that are not this offseason, that is. It is, as it always is with Paul Tenorio, a great conversation. He's got lots of knowledge, lots of insight, and a little bit of humor sprinkled in there too. So without any more rambling from me, here is my chat with Paul. With me now, I've got my friend and yours, Mr. Paul Tenorio of The Athletic. Paul, thank you very much for taking the time to be on the show today.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. And so when last I saw you, I was sick and had no voice, so I departed the bar. But I believe you were sitting at the bar with Jeff Ruder and Alexi debating something. Do you recall what that debate was about?
No, I don't recall what it was about.
Okay.
Because we debated so many different things. It's not even the booze. I mean, the booze played a role, but we just debated so many different things. Alexi was challenging me on like multiple ideas, as he usually does when we hang out. So I don't know. There were so many topics.
I just enjoyed. I genuinely think my final line to you was like, I was hugging you goodbye, and you were passively hugging me while still arguing your point. I believe with a drink in hand. So it was an impressive feat of multitasking.
When as we were talking before we hit record here, when I get stuck into an argument, it's hard to pull me out of it. So only half hugs and booze can distract me from what I think is a brilliant point and what probably is just a mediocre one.
All right, well, I'll remember that for next time, half hugs and booze. I can't really do that today, so, rant and argue away if you so choose. But I wanted to talk to you about the current U.S. national team, the January camp that's going on right now. I know you wrote a piece for The Athletic. You got to talk to Gregg Berhalter a little bit. You were in camp, so we wanted to hear about some of those experiences. Then we wanted to talk a little MLS, some salary rules, all that good stuff, all things I think that are well within your domain. All that sound good to you, Mr. Tenorio?
Absolutely.
All right, then let's get to it. I don't know how many camps that you've covered in the past, or January camps, that is, or just camps in general. But from your experience, from what you've heard, how does the atmosphere in this current U.S. men's national team camp compare to ones of the past?
Well, this is definitely different because anytime you have a coaching change, there is an energy that picks up around the camp. Everyone looks at this as an opportunity to win a job. And that's typical of January camps because there are these fringe players who are getting an opportunity to make an impression. But in this case, I think it's kind of boosted by the fact that even the veterans who are in camp understand that they also are making a first impression of sorts on Gregg Berhalter. Obviously, Gregg Berhalter knows Will Trapp very well, and he knows Michael Bradley. He knows what they're capable of. But you still have to impress in camp and show why you should be somebody that he includes in his roster. So there is that kind of hopeful feeling around this camp. And I think there's a real energy as well because it's all new for Gregg Berhalter and his staff as well. They're coming into this optimistic. They're coming in this excited about the ideas that they have to rebuild the national team. And so that energy kind of was carrying the training sessions when I was out in Chula Vista. You've got the players trying to make an impression. You've got the coaches trying to teach and getting excited about seeing their ideas come into fruition in these training games and the 5v5s and the 8v8s and all of that. So there was a real positive vibe, and I expect that to carry on up until the Gold Cup when we start to see the first games that matter.
So you mentioned that they're coming to this with an optimistic point of view, that they're looking to rebuild. But what is their actual approach for doing that? How have they approached kind of taking the tactical instruction that I'm assuming it's kind of still based on what he was doing with Columbus, and then bringing it to the national team? How have they gone about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, their teaching methods are interesting. They recognize that January camp is a little bit unique in that you get a month with these players. So it's not going to be the same as the March camp where you only have a few days to prepare. But the idea, they want to test out teaching methods for those shorter periods. So they're overloading the players with a ton of information and making the training sessions are very difficult on some days to kind of create stress and see how players respond. And then the next day they pull back and they get much easier with what they're asking of the players on the field, how much they're asking them to learn or to take on in that day. And they're kind of rotating and trying to create these moments where the learning on the board or the learning through these drills becomes natural and becomes easy for the players. And for different players, it's been easier. And you can see that, actually. When I was out at training sessions, being able to watch them play, you can see some of the players who kind of just have a natural understanding for what Gregg Berhalter is asking from their position, and some players who are still thinking through where to be and how to look for the next pass and what's the run they should be making if the ball's here or the ball's there. And that's the process that's going on right now. The concepts of the way Gregg Berhalter wants to play remain the same from Columbus. It's all about controlling the game, controlling the ball, forcing the opponent into an uncomfortable spot by what you're doing with the ball. Mm-hmm. What the formation will look like and what he asks of different positions, that's where we're going to see some changes. That's where I think we'll see tweaks from the Columbus system, and it's going to be based, I think it'll look different in January camp than it's going to look when Christian Pulisic's in camp, right? Because for every play, one thing Gregg was clear about is he recognizes that there are certain players who you tweak your system around them versus making them tweak themselves for your system. Christian Pulisic's obviously the number one example of that. But I do think that for the most part in how he wants to play, it's going to be very familiar.
So going back to a point you made a little bit ago, you said there's certain players that are thriving, certain players that maybe are struggling a little bit more. From what you observed, who were the players that seemed like they were kind of picking it up quickly? I'm assuming that would be people like Will Trapp, Giassi Zardes, who are a little bit familiar or very familiar already with Gregg Berhalter. But who else might be in that group that's kind of thriving at the moment?
Yeah, two of the players that I think have been really a surprise and I think are going to open up some eyes maybe as the games happen in these next 2 weeks. Georgi Mihailovic from the Chicago Fire and Christian Roldan from Seattle.
Okay.
Georgi is probably the biggest surprise. He's very young. He's 20 years old. He's only played 2 professional seasons, really not even, right? Because most of last year he was out with an ACL injury. But his vision in the final third, his passing ability, his understanding for looking for those passes and movement, it fits really well with what Gregg Berhalter wants from the system they're training right now. And so you could see that. And both, well, I should say, some of the people I spoke to at camp, Georgi's name came up multiple times. Christian Roldan as well. I thought watching them in training, he looked very smooth on the ball, very natural. He was playing with Georgi Mihailovic in a formation where they were paired next to each other, and they were running the show. They were very, very clearly better than the pair on the other side of the field that were playing the same positions. And I won't mention those names because it was 1 or 2 training sessions. I don't know what it was like 2 days after I left.
I feel like I can guess who it is. But I won't press you.
In this case, it was. Yeah, I mean, so those 2 guys I think are younger guys who in this system fit very well. Like their strengths fit what's being asked of that position, and that's kind of what Gregg Berhalter is looking for when he's picking these rosters. Certain guys who have the skills and the traits that fit what he wants out of those positions in this system. So I wouldn't be surprised to see those guys, maybe if they can keep this up from the first couple weeks of training and show it in a game environment, which is that next level, right? There's one thing to do it in training, another thing to do it in a game. If they play well, if we see Georgi Mihailovic, Christian Roldan playing well against Panama and against Costa Rica, I could see them being involved in that March camp when the full team comes together.
As you said, it was only a few observations and a few training sessions, but from what you saw, was that the 2 of them with like one sort of deep-lying playmaker destroyer behind them?
Yeah, from what I saw, I mean, it was a borderline 4-1-4-1 that was being played, but the differences in formation when you have the ball versus when you don't have the ball, it's constantly shifting and changing. So, at times it could have looked more like a 3-man back line, at times a 4-man back line with what they were training. In this case, especially when I was watching Georgi and Christian play well, they were working on specific attacking end movement. And so those 2 were playing as almost a dual number 10, right? Midfielders who had moved up the field and we're closer to the top of the box. And so it was very specific, but, I think that we could see, I don't think that we'll necessarily always see the 4-2-3-1 for which Columbus was so well known, and that's understandable, right? I mean, that was built around Higuain as the number 10. There is no Higuain in this pool, and so do they eventually say, hey, maybe Djordje Mihailovic, if he keeps getting better, becomes the number 10 for the U.S. national team? I don't know, but it seems like there are some adjustments there where you add a couple more bodies into the middle of the park, and there's no clear playmaker, but you're built around the abilities of your wingers, you're built around the ball control ability of your central midfielders, and then you involve the fullbacks getting forward as well.
And then in that practice session, you saw who was the player ahead of those midfielders. Was it Gyasi Zardes, or were you looking at Christian Ramirez or Jeremy Ebobisse?
They were rotating a lot, that forward position especially was getting rotated out a lot. For the most part, I think Georgie and Christian's group had Gyasi, but when they went to later drills, they were swapping out who was playing up top. I think that'll be kind of the case, especially in that position, because Gregg Berhalter is repping with those forwards box movement over and over and over again. And so it's very easy to pull one forward out and put another in and try to get as many of those reps as you can. I think obviously Gyasi Zardes is going to have a little bit of a advantage over the other two players, considering he understands the box movements that Gregg Berhalter likes from his striker. But Christian Ramirez is somebody who that is the one strength of his game, is his ability in the box. And then, obviously Ebo is a kid who's younger, I think does a lot of the work outside of the box. Can they get him to a point where he's finishing at a better rate than he has in his first couple of years in MLS when he's had opportunities?
And then moving further back, I know when in that same article for The Athletic, you shouted out Montreal left back Daniel Lovitz. Is that a player who you think people might need to get a little bit more familiar with? Do you expect him to get significant minutes in this camp, or do you think it's going to be Nick Lima?
No, I think Lovitz has a great opportunity, especially now that Greg Garza left camp with an injury.
Right.
I mean, left back is a position where there's not a lot of depth, and Gregg Berhalter is very open to bringing different faces into that position to get a look and try to find somebody who has the qualities that he's looking for and that he wants to put into this system. So, I think he absolutely has a chance to make an impression early on. And with Garza's injury, I would expect him to get a decent number of minutes.
And then in terms of the center backs, we're just going to go through position by position, basically. I'm just wondering, it feels to me like Aaron Long is a pretty decent shout to go in there. How, from what you've heard of what you saw, how did he seem to be responding to life under Berhalter?
I think the center backs should be really excited to play under Berhalter. They're asked to do a lot more on the ball. Gregg Berhalter likes ball-playing center backs that will dictate possession, that can get on the ball and pick out a pass. Sometimes it's the simple pass to the number 6 who's dropping to kind of start things, and sometimes when there's pressure, it's looking for that long diagonal ball and finding a winger. There was a lot of work on playing out of pressure, out of the high press. That puts a lot on the goalkeepers. It puts a lot on the center backs. So for guys like Aaron Long who have shown an ability to be good on the ball and to make smart passes, I think it's a good opportunity for them. And, for younger center backs like Mark McKenzie, I think it really hammers home that that's the way that this position is going, not just with the national team, but in international football as well. So I think there's a reason why Gregg Berhalter brought these young center backs at a very deep position, is to kind of send a message of this is the way you should be working on playing, and these are the things that you should be focusing on as a young center back.
And then I saw, I'm not sure if this happened while you were there, I saw Josie Altidore, Jordan Morris were invited to attend camp, basically just to kind of observe. I think Altidore said they were flies on the wall. Is that just with an eye towards, you think, just getting them familiar with what's happening in camp? And if so, I'm also curious how you think those two would fit in the Berhalter system.
Yeah, I think both of them are players that Gregg Berhalter sees as being a part of this pool for the next 3 years going into the World Cup. Mm-hmm. Josie Altidore, I think, is still the best forward in the pool. And, while Josh Sargent is impressing in Germany, I think Josie Altidore is still going to be, when healthy, a guy that is pushing everyone around him to, hey, beat him out if they want the job. So, it makes sense that he would want Josie around to get familiar with his teaching methods, to get familiar with the style and the system he wants to play, and to be around the group. Jordan Morris, similar. The U.S., I will say one thing about Gregg Berhalter's system that I think will always be true is he's going to look for those runs from the wingers that can get behind the back line, and he wants those central midfielders to be able to make those passes that get fullbacks to have to turn and run toward their own goal. We've seen Ethan Finley be effective in that. We've seen Justin Merrim effective in that role. And, with Jordan Morris's pace, I could see him easily being a forward that fits into more of a winger role where you add some pace. Or if, you need to go with a two-striker system, he's a guy who is very complementary to a bigger target striker because of that ability to make runs with his pace. So, I think it's Gregg Berhalter looking at guys who he thinks will have a role with this team down the stretch over the next few years, even if they're not healthy right now. And he wants to get them in and get them acclimated.
We'll get back to my chat with Paul Tenorio in just a moment, but first I wanted to let you know that today's episode of the Total Soccer Show is brought to you by Dollar Shave Club. I really appreciate that Dollar Shave Club is keeping me out of stores. I tend to be an impulse buyer. I buy stuff I don't need. There's gum, there's sodas. You don't need that stuff, so stay out of the store and just go to Dollar Shave Club because they have everything you need to get ready for the day. They've got you covered for your hair, your skin, your face. It's all there. They've got lovely shampoos. I'm a big fan of the sage and black pepper shampoo and conditioner that we were sent, as well as their face wash that they gave you. No pepper in that one. That would be slightly uncomfortable. But they've got stuff for your teeth. They've got very fancy looking toothbrushes, which again I appreciate. And obviously they've got shave materials as well. Lots of different options for you. Lots of different scents and styles. All of that very much appreciated. And as I said, it all comes directly to your door once you place that order, so you don't have to go out here in Richmond or in the middle of a cold snap. No going outside. You stay warm, and then everything just gets delivered for you. That makes it very, very easy. They also have a new program where they automatically keep you stocked on the products you use, so you can just keep those things coming, and again, never have to go outside. Become a hermit with Dollar Shave Club. Best of all, they've got a bunch of starter sets you can try for just $5, like their oral care kit. After that, the restock box ships regular size products at regular price. So what are you waiting for? Get your starter set for just $5 right now at dollarshaveclub.com/TSS. That's dollarshaveclub.com/TSS. Thank you very much to Dollar Shave Club for keeping us looking fresh and well coiffed and well styled. It's very much appreciated, even if our listeners can't see it. So, with that said, back to my conversation with Mr. Tenorio. Well, since we've talked a little bit about veteran players, I feel like we should probably take a moment to discuss Michael Bradley, because I have a hard time believing that he could do that 4-1-4-1 job as the deep lying number 6. So then the question is, do you think that if they're going single holding midfielder, is that the domain of Will Trapp now? Is that Russell Knaus? Or do you think Michael Bradley might be given a chance just to see what he can do?
I think Michael Bradley's in camp to be given a chance to see what he can do, right? Can he still compete for that role? And, I don't know what that role is going to look like. Could they trust, Tyler Adams to be that number 6 in the future? Could they trust Weston McKennie to be that guy? Will it be Will Trapp because of his ability to kind of dictate the tempo with his passing from that deeper lying position? And Tyler Adams and Weston McKennie are playing higher up the field if it's a 4-1-4-1. Does it become a 3-2? A 3-2-2-1-2 or something crazy like that, and now you're pairing Weston McKennie and Tyler Adams in deeper positions, and they're looking for a guy to fill that higher role that kind of becomes an interchangeable complementary piece with Christian Pulisic and Tim Weah on the wings. There are a lot of different iterations of this that we're going to see, I think, as Gregg Berhalter gets different personnel in. But yeah, I would think right now if there's one deep lying position in this camp, I think probably Will Trapp is at the top of that depth chart. And the question is, does it look the same when you bring in the full pool? Because I think again, Gregg Berhalter, when he spoke to me, was very clear that his system is one that is adaptable to personnel, and when he gets different types of personnel in his group, he's going to be able to make adjustments to fit some of them better. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see it change between what we see in January camp with the personnel he has there and what we see when you add guys like Weston and Tyler and Christian Pulisic.
And just to clarify, when you say like the it there and what might change, Daryl and I have always been kind of like believers in you can have different like approaches. Like sometimes you're going to go with the back three because that suits whatever you're trying to do. But generally speaking, you want to be able to kind of have a rough idea of what the team is going to do. It feels like we haven't been able to do that of late. So I'm wondering how much like chopping and changing do you expect in terms of, is there a chance that against one team we're playing a back three and then against the next team we're playing a back four and then the next time we're playing a back three again? Like, is it going to be a lot of shifting, do you think, or it will be roughly similar shapes but with different people doing different things on a more like individual level?
Yeah, I think the latter for sure. So,
cool.
For example, if you watch Columbus play, right, they play a 4-2-3-1.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you look at them lined up at kickoff and you think about who is where on the field, it's a 4-2-3-1. But as soon as the game starts and Columbus is dominating the game, if they're in a game where they're in control at home and the team is playing deeper and looking for the counters, what starts to happen? The center backs split wide, Will Trapp drops in between the two center backs, and he becomes almost like a third center back because they're on the ball so much. That's how they're looking at and then they can push the fullbacks higher up the field, and now they can create overloads and different looks. I think we could see that with the national team. I think we could see what looks like a three-man back line, but is essentially a number 6, dropping between two center backs, the fullbacks getting high up the field, the wingers becoming almost out-and-out wingers, like a 3-4-3 essentially, and those types of changes. I do think Gregg Berhalter is smart enough to say, the way we play at home against Costa Rica is going to look different than the way we play on the road in Panama, or at Azteca. But I think that it's more about kind of the ideas behind how to defend and how to attack and the balance that you have to create based on the field you're playing on, based on the opponent, the concepts and the base of how Gregg Berhalter wants to play and what he wants to accomplish when he's on the field. That will never change. And he was very clear about that. They want to keep the ball. They want to be aggressive. I talked to him about that idea of, he talks about being competitive and all these things that U.S. soccer has been known for. I said, yeah, but, the one thing that I've always enjoyed about his Columbus teams is that they try to play good soccer all the time. They always want the ball. They always want to knock it. They always want to play pretty soccer. And I said, do you believe you can do that with the U.S. national team? He said, yes, I do. I said, why? He said, I'm determined, to make it a part of our identity, and I believe that we have the ability to do it. So I think that is the one core part of Gregg Berhalter that is never going to change. He wants his teams to be competitive. He wants them to work hard. He wants them to work for each other, but he's also going to want them to keep the ball and knock it and be aggressive. Might we see some counter pressing more in certain areas where you don't want to get pinned back? Yeah. Might we see on occasion where they try to spread things with the width of the field, getting the center backs out wide to control more of the game against weaker opponents? Sure. But I think the ideas of the base of what we know from Gregg Berhalter is always going to stay the same.
And so if you want to keep the ball, if you want to be aggressive, if you want to play good soccer, which wingers do you, Paul, think give you the best opportunity to do that of the wingers that are in the camp right now?
Of the wingers that are in the camp right now, that's a good question. I think I'm not sure.
I don't really know what to make of that sound that you just made.
Well, there's not really a ton of true wingers in the system as we see right now. You got Paul Arriola out there, Jonathan Lewis. I think Corey Baird will be played on the wing in this system. Maybe even Ibobase playing out on the wing, depending on what he's looking for. But I don't think that we're going to see out-and-out wingers until you start to bring in Christian Pulisic and Tim Weah, and I think Arriola will play a role in that as well. But with this camp, I think if you're playing kind of that 4-1-4-1, will you be kind of depending as much on the fullbacks to create possession and to create width, and allowing those wingers to be focused more on coming inside and combining or making those slashing outside in runs? I think Paul Arriola is probably the guy. Jonathan Lewis, when he talked about filling that role, it was very much about, we want a guy who's capable of being on the touchline and getting the ball and taking players on, but also coming inside and combining. So I think that's what Gregg Berhalter is looking for in the wingers in this camp. Corey Baird is more of that slasher. Jonathan Lewis is more of a guy who can play a little bit of soccer. I'm not sure, what we'll see. And again, when I'm at training sessions, I'm seeing them work on things in chunks, right? I'm seeing them work on things in the final third, or, working out of pressure from the back. So, what this all looks like when they get together in 11, I think will be a bit different. But, I would guess that, Arriola is probably for sure starting on one side. And then, what they do on the other, do they use a Leggett outside because he can come in and combine? That wouldn't surprise me. Do they use a Jonathan Lewis because of those same qualities? That wouldn't surprise me. It just depends on kind of how he wants to set it up against Panama and then against Costa Rica.
So we've talked about a lot of names at this point. We have mentioned goalkeeper. We can say Zach Steffen. We can move on from there. My question for you is this. If you were, say you were a lazy sports writer, which you obviously are not, but if I were asking you right now, like, hey, before these games even happen, write me an article about which player is going to come out, or like which player came out of these two games on top, who improved their standing the most. If you were writing that article right now, who would you be looking at before the games were even played?
Well, I am working on an article on a player who I think will come out of this camp. It won't be published for way beyond this camp. But I do think Djordje Mihailovic is going to be the surprise of this camp.
Okay.
I've heard enough positive things about him and around him, and I haven't written it to this point. I'm kind of giving my scoop here to the Total Soccer Show.
There we go.
But he's the guy I think will come out of this camp and have impressed more people than anyone else, and partly because the expectations were so low for somebody who was considered a huge surprise. I can tell you right now, the expectations are not low within U.S. soccer for what Djordje Mihailovic is capable of doing.
All right. I'm going to keep you talking now for like another 20 minutes or so while I come together with a pitch to send to The Athletic about how I think it's going to be Djordje Mihailovic. So thanks for that, Paul. I appreciate it.
No problem.
I did want to ask you about some of the other things that you've been covering, starting with the draft. That's why, well, you live in Chicago, but that's why we ran into each other in Chicago, because you were focused on that. What were your takeaways from this year's draft? I know you published an article for The Athletic that not necessarily critical, but just sort of was a realistic look at the current state of the draft.
Yeah, well, the value of the draft is changing as the league changes. That shouldn't be a surprise. In the same way that the value of academy players is changing and the value of a $250,000 American player is changing. As this league grows and the level goes up, mainly because they put more money into the rosters through targeted allocation money and through more DPs coming into the league, then, and because of the growth of the academies over the last 11 years, the level of college soccer has, the gap between the level of college soccer and the level of MLS has grown substantially. Part of that is also due to the fact that college soccer has been not just slow to adapt, unwilling to adapt. And so the level of the players coming out of college soccer is lower. And to the next degree, because a lot of the top players are signing professional contracts now, as homegrown players are going straight to USL contracts, the college levels, a lot of the better players are foreign. And so, when you're an MLS general manager looking to put together your roster, your likelihood of depending on a 21-year-old international signing out of the college level versus putting your resources into scouting target allocation money and looking for a 21-year-old international, it's going to lean towards the latter.
Yeah.
And so that's why the draft is less valuable. That doesn't mean there aren't still players that can be effective in the draft. The difference is there's probably 3 or 4 every year, and it's a 4-round draft with, almost 100 picks.
Yeah.
So, that's where there's this huge disparity.
And I agree with everything you said. It seems like Don Garber not quite as inclined to agree with you, at least publicly. But I have to assume that they're working on ways to either change the draft or change how the draft is done or what the draft actually is for MLS teams because of the way things went this year. Have you heard any rumblings like that, or do you think it will kind of continue in its present capacity?
I think, look, the league loves the marketing side of it. They love the speeches that the players make where they shed tears about their dream of playing in MLS, right? That looks great for the league. The problem is it creates these expectations about what these players will mean for these teams. And those expectations are much higher than what they should be. So I do think there will be some changes to happen to the draft. I always think there will be an event. I wouldn't be surprised to see the draft shortened to 2 rounds at some point. I wouldn't be surprised to see the league integrate homegrown signings into the draft day process to give more publicity to homegrown players who have a better chance of making an impact than a lot of these draft picks. But, the league believes that there are these moments where they can create buzz and they can create kind of moments, right? Quote unquote moments. And the draft is one of them. And so, they want to appeal to the everyday American fan as much as they want to appeal to the diehard soccer fans. Both of those demographics are important for Major League Soccer, and the draft is a way to appeal to the typical American sports fan. It's something they understand, and as long as that's true, I think MLS will have a draft of some form.
All right. But it seems like it will also always then be an opportunity for people who are especially crafty when it comes to the way salary structures work and everything within Major League Soccer. For people like that, it seems like it can be a thriving opportunity. For example, Ernst Tanner of the Philadelphia Union and what they did in this draft. Do you feel like if you have somebody who is particularly skilled at evaluating what the value of a draft pick is going to be, or the actual draft pick, not who that player is, but the number 8 pick in the first round. Do you think that can give you an advantage in terms of what you're asking for from Gam and Tam's standpoint? How important is it to have that sort of person familiar with the salary restrictions of Major League Soccer?
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be teams that can take advantage of the draft for different reasons, right? I mean, whether you've devoted more of your scouting resources to college and you are confident there are 3 players that can help you, and no one else is confident that there are 3 players in the draft, that's going to help. That's going to help those teams. I think those teams are going to be fewer and fewer, though. On the flip side, yeah, the trade market that's going to exist around the draft is going to be especially important for the bad teams in MLS who are towards the top of the draft, because now the value of those top slots is going to go through the roof, because a lot of teams are coming in and saying, hey, there's only 2 or 3 good players. Ernst Tanner is one of them. And if we're not going to get one of those 2 or 3, then, there's no point in us even drafting.
Yeah.
So I think that's another place where you'll see. And then lastly, yeah, I mean, I think, look, I don't think it'll be a huge deal if you're able to kind of do what Ernst Tanner did. If you're receiving $150,000 for 5 or 6 picks, in the big picture, it's not going to help your roster too much. But I think that you're sending a message certainly that you don't value the draft, and I think you're getting what you can out of it. I would also say, I'm interested to see in the next year or 2 if MLS continues to allow the draft to stay in its current form. We see a lot of these picks of people trading for kind of players that are leaving rosters for 3rd round picks or 4th round picks. That's great value right now, because those picks are essentially worthless. You're trading nothing for a player. Will we see a high influx of those types of trades from smarter GMs that are looking for veteran American guys on the back end of rosters? I wouldn't be surprised to see, a couple good GMs trying to take advantage of that market.
All right. And if they want to take advantage of that market, should they contact you? Because I feel like you've got the knowledge when it comes to all of the MLS rules, designated player, TAM stuff. I feel like Paul Tenorio has that market cornered.
Yeah, I like to argue with GMs over value all the time. So I'm always happy to take calls from GMs who want my opinions on where they can get value in MLS.
But I know you're writing kind of an explainer for The Athletic at present, or you've already written it, one or the other. If there was one concept that you think confuses MLS fans or non-MLS fans more than any other, what is it, and what would you like to explain? Or what would you like to take this opportunity to explain that maybe will help people better understand the league?
I think it depends. For Atlanta fans, the easiest thing I can explain to you is there is no way you will have 4 designated players on your roster next year. Stop trying to dream up all these different ways for it to happen. The loopholes don't exist. There's only 3 DPs allowed in the league. Now, whether that should change is a different story, and it's actually literally a different story that I'm working on right now.
All right.
But that is the one thing to get through their heads. And you can loan Barco and you can open up a whole new can of worms if you want to in your Atlanta, or you can take the $10 million profit that's on the table from Miguel Almiron and you don't upset anyone. Which would you do if you were a business person? So let's just start there. For MLS fans as a whole, the biggest thing I would say is when we talk about general allocation and targeted allocation money, the best way to think of it is not just as cash or just as an asset. Think of it as salary cap space. Mm-hmm. So the MLS salary cap is, I forget what it went up to this year. It's like let's just call it about 4.4 million or whatever. That's how much cap space you have, quote unquote. But it's a soft cap, right? Because allocation money is essentially cap space. So now with today's MLS, you have $4 million of targeted allocation money, and most teams are given about $200,000, sometimes as much as $400,000, depending on where they finish and all the different things that happen from the league every year in general allocation money. That doesn't include what you get from trades and what you get from selling players. So the more general allocation money that you get by selling players or by trades or TAM, the more salary cap space you have for your team. And that's the best way to think about it. So if you're maxing out on all of your TAM and you're maxing out, let's say you piled up $500,000 in GAM over the course of a year and a half, you're essentially going from having $4.5 million of cap space for your team to closer to $9 million of cap space to build your team. So that's why allocation money matters, and that's the best way to think about it.
Hey everybody, this is Taylor jumping in one more time to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Twillory. Twillory shirts are a commodity. They make stocking up your closet as simple as restocking beer in your fridge because it's easy, affordable, and perfectly fit, guaranteed. Given the price of some microbrews around the country, Twillory may also be a cheaper option than stocking your fridge with beer. I am currently wearing their Untuckable shirt, their gray and black one, which I like very much because I like gray and black, but I also like it because I don't wear my shirt tucked in very often, which can be kind of awkward because normal shirts usually kind of balloon out at the bottom and makes me look about 300 pounds heavier than I am, which I don't always love. The Untuckable one, though, it's got a nice cut to it, so it kind of stays trimmed to your body. You don't look like a big blob. Instead, you look sleek, even if you're not, which is the case for me. Twillory also offers you the opportunity to shop in bundles, so you can get access to shirts at $55 that their competitors would sell for over $100. They also offer free shipping and returns, free brushed nickel collar stays, which I really enjoy. They come in like a little smart holder. You look very fancy, and I always enjoy that. It's also very much worth noting that Total Soccer Show listeners can get $25 off their first shirt order by going to twillory.com/TSS and entering the promo code TSS at checkout. One more time, that's twillory.com/TSS and TSS at checkout. I'll include a link to that one in the show notes. We also posted a couple photos of us wearing Twillory shirts to our Instagram. If you want to see what they or we look like, you can go there. So thank you once again to Twillory for sponsoring today's episode and keeping me untucked. I always like that. I like it so much, in fact, that I will stop talking now and instead let Paul Tenorio convey all the knowledge. And so we're recording this mid-late January 22nd, for those tuning in a little bit later on. Who at this point do you think in the MLS offseason has done the best job of putting themselves in a position to compete, make the playoffs? Who has improved or stayed where they were from last season? And are there any teams that you're sort of looking at and wondering, what are you all doing right now?
That's a good question. I think right now when I look around the league and I try to think of teams that have improved the most, I would say in the East, I think DC and Montreal are two teams that are going to be very strong this season. Montreal actually performed really, really well down the stretch last year. They just had such an awful start that they couldn't climb all the way back in. So, they add Maxi Urruti, they lose some pieces as well. Can they carry that forward into 2019? Obviously DC United, we saw what they added late last year. I also think Toronto FC, they're a team who I'm not sure that they're going to get better. They're carrying the same problems they had last year into this year. They have three players who are in contract years. I don't think any of whom Toronto wants to bring back, outside of maybe Michael Bradley at a much different rate. But you've got Josie Altidore and Sebastian Giovinco who essentially are being told, we know we're done here. And so, what are you going to get especially out of Giovinco, when he gets to the summer window and he can sign a pre-contract to play somewhere else? Those are issues that have an impact on the on-field product. Chicago as well.
Just to clarify, were you saying that Giovinco, Josie are being told they're done here, or is that them saying, yeah, we're ready to move on?
I think by the fact that the team hasn't told them we want you to stay,
yeah,
they are taking it as I'm probably done here.
I see.
And
okay.
so, that's going to lead to some issues. It led to issues last year in the locker room. So why would it be any different this year? The Chicago Fire, what have they done really? They bring in Frankowski, now from Poland, a young player with a lot of potential, has broken into the senior national team. He'll help them, but they have 4 defenders on the roster right now. They still don't have a starting goalkeeper, though it seems David Alstead is on the way. So they, in my opinion, still have to add 3 to 4 more starters to this team before they are competitive. And that's ignoring the fact that they still have depth issues. Over in the West, I think that I'm very interested to see if FC Dallas takes a step backwards with the coaching change, with the moves that they've made, going very, very young. What will that look like? Will it look like it did with the Galaxy when Kurt Anolfo was given that short leash and was depending too much on young players who weren't ready yet? That's one of the most interesting teams that I see out west. San Jose, I think they are still another year away from being able to make the wholesale changes that they have to make in order to be competitive. The one most intriguing team for me in the West, out of they could be a dark horse that we get totally different experience than we think out of that team, is Vancouver. With Mark Dos Santos, huge changes in that roster. Mark has won wherever he's been, but he's kind of acting as the GM and the coach right now. Will that work in year 1 in Vancouver, or does he need more time? That's kind of the mystery team for me in the Western Conference.
Sticking in the Western Conference, we talked about Jeremy Obobese a little bit, what he brought to Portland and maybe didn't bring to Portland. I know at least last I saw, they were out looking for maybe another goal-scoring option. What's the latest there, and who have you heard they're looking at?
Well, they're looking at Ezekiel Ponce, who's overseas, playing in Ajax right now in Greece. He's he would be a young DP. He's scoring at a consistent rate at Ajax now. He's owned by Roma. He's been on loan to several different teams. They're also looking at a young forward in Mexico. Not able to share the name of that player, but they have identified 2 targets. I think they do want to upgrade that position, and it makes sense to me. You can think Jeremy Obobese is a promising prospect, and still also understand that as a responsibility of a team to have competition and depth at important positions like forward, and production at an important position like forward, that you need to add help. And I think if Portland sits still and doesn't do anything, and Obobese continues to finish at the rate where he's finished last year when he was a starter, they're going to be a team that's in a lot of trouble. And if your only backup plan is a guy like Maxi Urruti or worse than that, then the fans are going to be calling for your head, and the analysts are going to be calling for your head. This is called preparation. This is called, roster building. And only in this country do I hear people shouting for teams to add bad depth in order to clear a pathway for a young American player or a young domestic player to get guaranteed minutes to prove himself at the risk of potentially tanking a season for an entire team. Nowhere else in the world is that the case. There's always good teams looking to bring in competition at every position, and that's what the Timbers are doing. And if they wouldn't be doing that, and if they were to ignore the fact that they need depth at that position, those same people would be hammering the front office of the Timbers if things fall apart halfway through the year.
So is there a chance, given, I didn't mean for it to go this way, but say those conversations with Ponce and mystery striker in Liga MX break down, what's the chance that we see a panic move of Portland trying to get Josie Altidore?
I don't think that would be the case. I guess if they don't get either of these 2 young targets in this window, yeah, they'll be shopping. They'll certainly continue shopping in the summer window. I don't know where Josie's going to land. There's a lot of moving parts with Josie Altidore. If you take him on in the summer window, you basically would have to agree to a new contract before you did that. You're not going to take a player who's out of contract and able to sign anywhere in the world. I guess essentially except for MLS, because you'd basically be taking on his MLS rights. But he's going to have suitors elsewhere. The price point for Josie will not be just the only talking point there. So it'll be tough for a team to move forward Josie halfway through the year. That being said, you're not on the wrong path. Like, if Toronto starts off poorly, they might be looking to get something for the assets that they have and start to move players off the roster in preparation for what 2020 is going to look like. That's not something that's inconceivable to me. I think that would be essentially the same idea for Toronto, preparing the roster for what comes next. So it's certainly something to keep an eye on, but we've never really gotten to a situation with these types of DPs that are on such huge money, that are up for renegotiation. What are teams willing to pay? Because I think when you look at Michael Bradley, you look at Josie Altidore, they are overpaid compared to kind of what their production is. Part of overpaying them was bringing them back to Major League Soccer at a key portion of their career. So how are those contract negotiations handled? It's very intriguing to me.
All right, well then how about this? We keep Josie as a DP. We move him to Atlanta. They just go for 5 and see if MLS will really fold under the pressure. Let's get 5 DPs in Atlanta.
Atlanta fans would spend weeks and weeks figuring out if that was true. They would do whatever it took to convince themselves that it was true.
And if they did, I'm sure you would let them know via Twitter that it's not going to work. Because I have noticed that it feels like you've gotten a little bit punchier on Twitter. Has that always been your style? Is that just me following you more recently and paying attention more recently?
No, yeah, I've definitely. I kind of made it a New Year's resolution that I was going to be a little punchier on Twitter, and I think it's more just I'm often quiet and I keep my observations to myself, or I share them with Sam Stayskool or other people via text, and just kind of get it out privately.
It's interesting that I've never received those texts, Paul. I feel like I'm checking my phone here.
You've got to be better at enticing me. People send me tweets to wind me up.
Oh, okay.
And, I look at a big part of my job, a really big part of my job covering soccer in this country, as trying to educate people as much as I can. Not just, obviously not about the sport. Like, people are intelligent soccer fans. They understand what's going on. But I have access to general managers and to coaches and to players and to league officials. And, I'm able to learn these rules better than most people because I can talk through things with those people who are in these powerful positions or on the inside. And, so I try to make that a big part of my job is how to educate them. And so, sometimes I see points being made on Twitter that are opinions, and opinions are fine. And I'm going to agree with some of them. I'm going to disagree with some of them. But I get frustrated when those opinions aren't challenged and they start to form narratives that kind of bombard my Twitter feed and bombard topics that are important in Major League Soccer and in the direction of soccer in this country, which is something I've been covering since I started at the Washington Post in 2007, so a long time. And so I think it's part of my responsibility to put my opinion out there as well, or my interpretation of that, less my opinion and more my interpretation of those kind of key drivers of growth in MLS and then U.S. soccer, and just to show that, one person's opinion or one side of the argument isn't just the truth or just the only way to look at it, to show that there is interpretation here, that there are different ways to think about it and different ways to look at it, and to show that, hey, while this opinion in the larger sense might be true, in this specific instance, it's not. And the more I can do that, I think the better I'm trying to do better for the audience. It's hard on Twitter, right? Because Twitter is this kind of toxic place, and it makes it look like I've got beef with specific individuals, or that I'm trying to kind of exert myself as like the big dog or something. It's not the way. I don't want it to be like that.
Yeah.
I just want to show that there are other ways of looking at these issues and kind of keep it so that there is no one that's, no one, including myself, that has the power to push a narrative or an agenda in only one direction.
All right, bear with me here, but I do sort of like the idea of you being like American soccer Twitter's Batman, that you'll just kind of jump in when the situation requires it to police what's going on. And with that in mind, I did have a conversation with Jason Davis in Chicago, sort of about Twitter and about how Twitter can be, as you said, kind of toxic, especially because with limited characters and maybe just like the anonymity of the internet, like you can be a bit more blunt, a bit ruder, and it does feel like debates or conversations tend to go that way. So what I'm going to propose is that if people want to ask you a question or have a polite discourse with you, they have to begin it by saying, "Dear Batman." That's what I want them to say to you on Twitter to signify that they're going to be nice to you. Does that work for you?
Yeah, anything that signifies to me that you're being nice on Twitter is helpful, because otherwise, usually if I get stuck in it, I end up in a really bad mood, and then I'm drinking the booze part, and I'm doing half hugs. So
no half hugs.
So let's keep the half hugs happening.
We brought it full circle. Okay, so if you don't want if you don't want me to have to fly to Chicago to half hug Paul Tenorio, then just begin all of your tweets to him with "Dear Batman" or "Excuse me, Batman," something like that, and then Paul can respond. I think we've set up a pretty foolproof system here, Paul.
Yeah, I can't wait for my wife to see the first tweet at me that says "Dear Batman." It's going to be wonderful.
I hope you get at least one. But Paul, thank you very much. You've been very generous with your time today. Give us a lot of great insight into the U.S. national team, Major League Soccer, front offices, draft. You've got a lot going on. If people want to follow you, see what you're up to, how can they do so? How can they find you?
Yeah, you can always find me on Twitter at Paul Tenorio. Hopefully also following the Athletic SPCR, the Athletic Soccer on Twitter as well. That's where you can find my work. So always happy to chat, to go back and forth on Twitter, and sometimes to push back at you, and sometimes to just have a good debate that we can all walk away from happy, hopefully.
All right. Well, thank you, Batman. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.